let's go ahead and start with an overview of literacy. So, basically, this is called the Threads of Literacy. This is adapted from the Scarborough Reading Rope, which basically outlines the areas of literacy that are required um, in order to have proficient reading. So think of this as like ingredients in a cake. So if you're making a cake and you have your eggs and you have your flour and everything else that goes in there, if you forget one of those particular items, like I did when I was making a pumpkin pie one time, if you forget any one of those particular items, it's just not going to turn out right. And the one magical item that I forgot was sugar. Of all the things, I forgot the sugar. So it was just quite interesting kind of pumpkin pie without that sugar. So back to reading, if we don't have all the ingredients, we're not going to have proficient reading and at the end of the day. So let's look specifically at what these areas are. So we're going to start with language comprehension. So these are all the different areas that contribute to language comprehension. So first, we're talking about background knowledge. That means basically the experiences that we bring to a particular topic. So if I'm talking about pumpkin pie and you have never even seen pie in your life, then you're not going to have that kind of background knowledge. So having that kind of idea of I may not know the specifics of what you're talking about, but at least have some kind of general idea. That's background knowledge. um, Vocabulary. So, vocabulary, the words we understand, we use, and they connect to meaning. So, if we don't understand, if we haven't heard these particular words that we're reading or that are being spoken or whatnot, if we've never heard that before, we're going to have a hard time understanding. So, background knowledge, vocabulary is very important. This all leads to language comprehension. Language structures, that means how words and sentences fit together for meaning. Verbal reasoning, which is our ability to basically make sense of what we're reading, inferences that we're making, or connections we're making. And then also literacy knowledge, which is just how the print and text are organized. So basically, if we're going to read a narrative story, we know that it starts off, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end to the story. If we're going to be reading a nonfiction text, then we know that there's going to be areas of basically our general areas we're starting off with, and then our detailed areas of whatever topic it is we're talking about. So there's a different sense for what type of text that we're reading. So all of this comes together for what we call language comprehension. So now let's move over to the word recognition part of this structure here. So word recognition has to do with phonological awareness, which we'll talk about in a little more detail, and decoding and sight recognition. So basically, if we are having trouble with being able to know what that word is, that's this word recognition part. So very often, we can kind of tell the difference where the struggle is happening by asking this simple question. And it's if you are reading a story aloud to your child. So think about like bedtime stories, and if your children are a little bit older, then think back a few years when you were like reading a story to them. Were they understanding what you were saying? And if they were struggling with that, if they were struggling with pieces of that, it's very possible that they were struggling with that language comprehension piece, that top part there, because absent of being able to decode the words, like if I don't have to decode the words, if I'm just going to listen to a story, same thing like with listening to books on audio. So if I'm listening to a story, do I understand what's happening? And if the answer is yes, then but I'm having trouble with being able to comprehend what I'm reading, more than likely it's because of that word recognition piece. So, and if let's say we can decode the word, let's say we have no trouble being able to decode it and spell the word, which we'll talk about in a second. If we have no trouble with being able to do those things, but we're having trouble still being able to grasp and understand what we're talking about, then that's where it could be that language comprehension piece. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of be able to understand and screen for that. because just like with everything else, we really want to know where the breakdown is occurring in order to be able to fix the problem. And so let's move on because we're going to specifically focus on this word recognition piece now as we move forward.